In the theater of horror, my parents called family, I was the sole actor. The stage was this tender body. The abuser was my father. And the most loyal audience, the one who sat silently chewing popcorn in the darkness, was my mother. For 7 years, that play tormented me nightly. This is the true story of the final act, where I decided to rewrite the script and bring the curtain down forever. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. How are you all? I hope you're well, with health and peace in your hearts. I am Charlotte Antunes, and I'm 72 years old. Time flies, doesn't it? It feels like only yesterday I arrived in this big city, scared of everything, and now I feel like I was born here. Today dawned so beautifully, with a little sunbeam streaming through my living room window. I'm sitting here in my green armchair, the one my late husband Walter gave me for our silver anniversary. From my little corner, I can see my collection of miniature ceramic sea turtles that decorates the whole wall. Have you ever seen one of them? They're small, handmade sculptures, all painted with vibrant colors and intricate shell patterns, just like the real sea turtles you see in the Gulf. Every morning, I wake up early, before the sun even comes up. I make my coffee strong. I don't like those modern machines. Coffee from an old percolator is the only kind with real flavor. Then I go to my little workshop that I set up in the back room. That's where I create my ceramic sea turtles. I have clay, paints, fine brushes, and a special kiln. My neighbors joke that I'm the turtle grandma of the neighborhood. I started making these miniatures after I became a widow, about 15 years ago. It was actually my goddaughter, Megan, who set me on this path. I was sad, with no desire to get out of bed, and she signed me up for a ceramics class at the community center. "Aunt Charlotte," she said, "keep your mind busy with art, and sadness won't find any room." And you know what? It worked. From that first lopsided sea turtle I made, I now have a collection of over 200, all of them different. People even come from other cities to buy them. I even started a web page. Can you imagine that? A woman my age selling art on the internet? And look, it wasn't always easy to get here, you know. Life has its ups and downs, as they say. There were times I thought I couldn't take it, that I wouldn't have the strength to go on. But today, at 72, I can say I survived it all. We are stronger than we imagine, my dears. We can endure what seems unendurable. Here from my third-floor apartment, I have a small balcony where I let my freshly painted turtles dry. The kids in the building love to come up and watch me work. I teach them how to model with a little clay. We make colorful little animals together. Seeing their eyes light up when a piece is finished is one of the greatest joys of my life. Every turtle I make is unique, with its own personality, just like each of us. And you, my dears watching me now, tell me in the comments what little town you're watching from and what time of day you found this video. Early in the morning with your coffee, after lunch, or in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this old grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? It feels like we're all sharing a quiet moment together, no matter how far apart we are. Today, I wanted to share a story with you that I've never told many people. It's a difficult story, the kind you keep locked inside your chest for years, afraid to open the door and let it out. But you know, my dears, sometimes telling it is a way to set yourself free. And who knows, maybe my story will help someone who is going through something similar. Life isn't always as colorful as my sea turtles. Sometimes it's a theater of horrors, as it was for me for so long. I was born in Oak Haven, a small town in northern Florida, in 1953. Back then, the town was very different from what it is today. It had few paved streets, many wooden houses, and everyone knew everyone. My family lived in a large house on the high part of town. It was an old building, made of dark wood, with a porch that wrapped around the entire front and tall windows with lace curtains that my mother made sure to keep impeccably white. My father, Frank Miller, owned the only hardware and electrical supply store in the region. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, always in a well-pressed shirt and slacks, even on the hottest days. He had cold, green eyes, like well water, and a thick mustache that he trimmed every week with a small pair of scissors he kept in his pocket. In town, everyone respected him. Mr. Miller is a serious man, they would say. And he liked that reputation. He cultivated that image very carefully. My mother, Helen Miller, was a teacher at the public elementary school. She was thin, always with her hair in a tight bun, and wore round glasses that would slide down her fine nose when she lowered her head to read. She had a soft voice, almost a whisper, and walked silently, as if she didn't want to be noticed. She taught English and was known for being strict with grammar. The students feared her corrections with a red pen, but outside the classroom, she was a woman who was hardly heard. I was an only child. My parents tried to have other children, but my mother had some problems, as they used to say back then. It was only much later that I understood they were miscarriages. So, all the attention was focused on me. And that wasn't always a good thing. Believe me, our house was too big for just 3 people. It had 4 bedrooms, a living room, a separate dining room, a kitchen, and a spacious, detached workshop where my father kept his tools and other belongings. The backyard had a few fruit trees, a mango tree that bore huge, sweet fruit, and 2 orange trees. When the fruit was in season, I would climb those trees and stay up there, hidden among the leaves, eating the fruit still warm from the sun. Those were rare moments of freedom. At school, I was a quiet girl. I kept to myself, studied hard, and got good grades. Not because I was particularly smart. No, it was more out of fear. My father didn't accept bad grades. He said it was a shame to have a dumb daughter. So I tried hard, memorizing everything, even what I didn't understand. I had few friends. Patricia, the pharmacist's daughter, was the one who was closest to me. We played with dolls during recess, but she never came to my house. Nobody did. The routine in our house was as rigid as a clock. We woke up at 6 a.m. every day, even on Sundays. Breakfast at 6:30, lunch at noon sharp, dinner at 7 p.m. My father hated lateness. If I happened to be late for a meal, he would leave the plate on the table but wouldn't let me eat. "Those who don't respect schedules don't deserve food," he would say, putting everything away in the refrigerator. I went to bed hungry on those nights. On Sundays, we went to church early. My parents made a point of sitting in the front row. My father would leave large bills in the collection plate so everyone could see his generosity. After the service, we would walk through the town square, greeting acquaintances. "What a beautiful family," people would comment. My father would smile proudly. My mother would look at the ground, holding my hand tightly. I smiled because I knew it was what they expected of me. When we got home, we changed our clothes. My father didn't allow us to wear our Sunday best in the house. He said it was a waste. And we would begin preparations for the special lunch. That Sunday lunch was sacred. My mother would spend the whole morning in the kitchen, preparing roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a side of coleslaw. It was the only meal where my father served wine, a small glass for him and another for my mother. I drank cherry Kool-Aid, red like the wine. It was on one of those Sunday nights, when I was about 8 years old, that everything began to change. After dinner, my father announced something new. "Tonight, we're going to have a family movie session." My mother looked at him, and an expression I couldn't decipher crossed her face. It wasn't just fear. There was a flicker in her eyes, a strange, tense stillness in her posture, almost like a predator before the pounce. It was an unsettling eagerness that chilled me more than my father's command. He told me to go take a bath and put on my pajamas while he set up the living room. When I returned, the lights were off. Only the small lamp in the corner was on, giving the room a dim, yellowish light. The curtains were drawn. The television, our black and white television, was on, but only showing static, not tuned to any channel. My father had dragged his armchair to the center of the room, facing the television. "Come here, honey," he called, patting his knee, indicating that I should sit on his lap. That seemed strange. My father wasn't affectionate. He never held me on his lap or gave me kisses, but I obeyed, as I always did. My mother came into the room carrying a large bowl of popcorn. She sat in the armchair next to his, placed the bowl on her lap, and began to eat slowly, one piece at a time. "Tonight, Daddy is going to teach you some important things," he said in a different voice, lower, huskier. "Things every little girl needs to learn." What happened that night, and on many other nights after, my dears, is difficult to talk about. At the time, I didn't really understand. I just knew it was bad, that it hurt my soul, and that afterward I felt dirty, as if I had done something wrong. My father said it was our secret, that all families had their secrets, and that if I told anyone, he and my mother would go to jail, and I would be sent to an orphanage where the children were beaten every day. You see, my dears, a child doesn't know what to call that kind of monster. I only knew that I had done something wrong, that I felt dirty, and that feeling of guilt. That was the first cage he locked me in, and it was stronger than any iron bars. And my mother, she just sat there, watching everything, eating her popcorn. Sometimes I would look at her, hoping she would do something, say stop, protect me. She just chewed slowly, looking at us, like someone watching any old television show. The sound of the popcorn crunching between her teeth was the only sound she made during the entire session. A child's world is built on trust, and in that moment, Charlotte's world began to crumble. That single, chilling sound would become the soundtrack to a private hell that was only just beginning. How does a little girl endure years of such profound betrayal? Let's continue to hear her story of survival. I know you're wondering, my dears. I wondered myself for so many years. How could a mother be that way? Looking back now, I think perhaps she was trapped in a fear even greater than my own, a silence that had eaten away at her soul long ago. Sometimes, silence is a more terrible prison than violence itself, my dears. These movie sessions started happening every week, always on Sunday night, after dinner. It became a routine as predictable as the church service in the morning. I tried to get sick on Sundays, faking a stomachache, a headache, but my father would say I was lying, that it was just an act, and so the session would happen anyway. At school, I became quieter and quieter. The teacher called my mother in once, worried because I had stopped participating in class and playing at recess. "She's just shy," my mother explained with that polite smile she used in public. "At home, she's a chatterbox, a lie as big as our house. At home, I hardly spoke. I was afraid that any word might irritate my father, provoking another session on an unscheduled day. It went on like this until I was 12, when I got my first period. I remember the terror I felt when I saw the blood, thinking I had been seriously hurt after a particularly difficult session. I ran to my mother, crying. She explained without emotion in her voice that I was a young lady now. That night I heard my parents arguing in their room. The following week, the movie sessions had changed. Now they happened in the workshop, and they were different, worse in a way. But I won't go into those details, my dears. When I turned 13, in 1966, my father insisted on throwing a party. It wasn't common in our town to have parties for girls that age. That was something for rich people or people from the city. But he insisted. "My daughter will have a proper party," he told the neighbors. Some commented that Mr. Miller was getting more generous with age. If only they knew the truth behind that generosity. The party took place in our backyard, decorated with colorful banners and paper lanterns. Helen spent days preparing snacks, cakes, and sweets. My father even hired a young man who played the acoustic guitar to entertain the guests. I remember being impressed by the number of people who showed up. There were classmates, neighbors, fellow churchgoers, customers from my father's store. Everyone wanted to celebrate the daughter of the respected Mr. Miller. I received several gifts. One, in particular, stood out to me. A diary with a lock. It was from Patricia. "For you to write your secrets," she said, not knowing the weight those words carried. That diary would become my only confidant in the years that followed. My father gave me a light blue dress of fine fabric with delicate embroidery. "A young lady needs to dress like a young lady." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. But his eyes said something else, something only I could understand. That night, after everyone had gone home, he called me to the workshop for the first time. He said he had another present for me, something special, just for us. The workshop in our backyard was a place that had always scared me. It was large, with a dirt floor and stone walls, always cold and damp. My father had set up a space there, with an old mattress covered by a clean sheet, some cushions, and a dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. In a corner, there was an old wooden chair. "Your mother's throne," he said with a laugh that made my blood run cold. And just like in the movie sessions before, my mother appeared with her bowl of popcorn, sat in the chair, and began to chew slowly, looking at us with that same empty expression. But there was something different that night. My father was more nervous, more excited. He talked more, saying things he had only whispered before. "Now you're a young lady, Charlotte," he repeated, as if it were a mantra. "And young ladies need to learn new things." What happened that night was worse than anything that had happened before. For the first time, it wasn't just words, strange touches, or humiliating orders. It was something that broke me inside, that left a wound that has never completely healed. I cried. I begged him to stop. I looked at my mother, searching for any sign of help, but she just kept eating her popcorn, as if watching a scene from some soap opera. The horror has now found a new, colder stage, and the one person who could have saved her remains a silent spectator. A part of Charlotte was broken that night, but another part began to take notes in a secret diary, and that small act of defiance will become more important than she could ever imagine. In the days that followed, I could barely walk. I had pains I couldn't explain to anyone. My mother gave me some medicine without saying a word, without asking how I was. That was the most care I received. At school, the teacher noticed I was different. "Charlotte, you look pale. Are you sick?" she asked. I just shook my head. What could I say? Who could I tell? No one would believe me. My father was Mr. Miller, the respected merchant. My mother was Mrs. Miller, the exemplary teacher. Who would listen to a girl accusing her own parents of such horrible things? I started writing in the diary Patricia had given me. I wrote everything. Every detail of the sessions, every word my father said, every empty look from my mother. It was my only way to vent. I kept the diary under a loose floorboard in my room, a place I had discovered by accident when I was little. It was safe there, or so I thought. The sessions in the workshop became regular. They were no longer just on Sundays. They happened whenever my father felt like it, 2, 3 times a week. Sometimes, when he drank more, he would come to my room in the middle of the night. On those occasions, my mother wasn't there with her popcorn, and somehow that made it even more terrifying. To survive, I created a safe place inside my mind. It became a ritual within a ritual. As soon as the workshop door closed, I would close the door to my own mind. I focused on the smallest details of my imaginary apartment in Tampa, the pattern on the cheap linoleum floor, the way the light filtered through the clean, simple curtains. I furnished it piece by piece, night after night. A small wooden table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with stories where girls were heroines. This wasn't just daydreaming, it was architecture. I was building a fortress, brick by imaginary brick, to house the part of me they could not touch. During the sessions, I would transport myself far away. I imagined myself in Tampa, a city I only knew from photos in old magazines at the school library. In my fantasies, I lived alone in a small, clean apartment. I worked in a nice clothing store. I had friends. I went out for ice cream on Sundays. It was a simple life, but free from the horrors of the workshop. At 14, I was completely changed. The cheerful girl I once was had disappeared. In her place was a quiet teenager with downcast eyes who startled at any touch. My only joy was school. There, for a few hours, I could pretend to be normal, to have a family like the others. It was around this time that Miss Josephine arrived at our school. She came from Tampa to replace a teacher who had retired, and she brought a breath of fresh air. She spoke differently, dressed differently, had different ideas. In English class, she encouraged us to write essays about our dreams, our fears, our desires. "Writing is liberating," she would say. One afternoon, we were alone in the classroom. I had offered to help her organize the books on the shelf. She watched me as I worked in silence. "Charlotte, you write very well," she commented suddenly. "Your texts have a depth that's unusual for someone your age." I thanked her shyly, without looking up. But there's something that worries me, she continued. There's a sadness in your words, a pain that isn't normal for a 14-year-old girl. I felt my heart race. No one had ever noticed, or at least no one had ever said anything. You know you can trust me, don't you? She asked, her voice soft, like a caress. If something is bothering you, something you want to talk about. For a moment, I almost told her everything. The words were on the tip of my tongue. But then I remembered my father's threats, my mother's empty gaze, the constant fear, and I just shook my head, swallowing my tears. Everything's fine, miss. I lied. I just like to write sad stories. Oh, my dears, if only I could go back to that moment and do things differently. But you know, when you live with fear for that long, it becomes a part of your own skin. I wanted to scream for help, but it felt as though his threats had locked my throat. The light was right there, but I didn't dare step into it. She didn't press, but she made it clear that her door was always open if I wanted to talk. That night, I wrote about her in my diary, about what it would be like to have a mother like Miss Josephine, someone who really cared. The following weeks were the same as the ones before. School during the day, terror at night. My father seemed increasingly out of control. The store wasn't doing well. There were debts, problems he brought home and took out on me. My mother continued her role as a silent spectator, eating her popcorn while my life was destroyed before her eyes. One afternoon, coming home from school, I found the house in an uproar. My mother was rushing back and forth, packing bags. My father was shouting orders, his face red with anger. "What's going on?" I asked fearfully. "We're moving," my father answered curtly. I closed the store. "We're going to Gainesville. I have a cousin there who got me a job at a lumber mill." I felt a mix of fear and hope. Moving meant leaving behind my school, Miss Josephine, Patricia, but it could also mean a new beginning. Maybe in a bigger city, with more people, more eyes. The sessions would stop. Maybe my father would be afraid to continue with it in a place where he wasn't known and respected. "When are we going?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Pack only the essentials. We'll buy the rest there." That night, as I packed my small bag, I made a decision. I wouldn't take clothes or shoes or the few toys I still had. I would only take one thing. My diary was the only proof of what I had lived through, the only thing that kept me sane. I hid it at the bottom of the bag, between two old blouses. The next morning, we left before dawn. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. We left behind the large, dark wooden house, the workshop of horrors, the town that had been a silent witness to my suffering. On the bus to Gainesville, I sat by the window, watching Oakhaven disappear behind me. I didn't know what awaited me in the new city, but I was sure of one thing. Hell was traveling with us. Gainesville was a very different city from Oakhaven, bigger, noisier, full of factories and people in a hurry. Our new house was in a neighborhood far from the center, a simple brick building, much smaller than the last. Only 2 bedrooms, one for my parents, one for me. A small kitchen, a cramped living room, and a dirt backyard. My father started working at a lumber mill. He would come home tired, smelling of sawdust and sweat. My mother got a job at a public school, not as a teacher, but as a custodian. Her hands, once delicate from holding only chalk and books, were now always red and chapped from the constant use of cleaning products. I thought this change, this harder life, might alter our family dynamic. For a few weeks, I held on to that hope. My father seemed very busy with work. He came home late, often already drunk, and would fall into bed with no energy for anything else. The session stopped temporarily, and I started to breathe a little easier. But the truce was short-lived. He soon discovered that the workshop of the vacant house next door had an entrance from our backyard. All he had to do was hop the low brick wall and go through an old door that didn't close properly. He cleared a corner in there, put some old blankets on the floor, and the ritual began again. Now, with a terrible difference. Since we were in a strange place, without the security of the reputation he had in Oakhaven, he became even more aggressive, more violent. And my mother? She continued her role as a spectator. She would bring her bowl of popcorn, sit in a corner, and watch everything with those empty eyes. Sometimes I noticed something different in her, a silent tear, a tremor in her hands, but never, not once, did she do anything to help me, to stop what was happening. In the new school, I was just another transfer student from a small town. No one knew me. No one cared about me. I didn't make any friends. I would sit alone during breaks, in a corner of the schoolyard, watching the other girls laugh and talk. How could I approach them? What would I say if they asked about my family, about my life? The secrets I carried isolated me like invisible walls. At 15, I started having health problems. Constant headaches, insomnia, loss of appetite. I lost so much weight that my ribs showed under my pale skin. At school, the guidance counselor, Mrs. Davis, called me in for a talk. "Charlotte, we're worried about you," she said, looking over her thin-rimmed glasses. "Your teachers have noticed you've been very down. You don't participate in class. Your grades are dropping." I kept my eyes down, my hands clasped in my lap. What could I say? "Is something going on at home?" she asked directly. I felt my heart pound. This was my chance, I thought. Someone was asking. Someone seemed to care. But then I remembered my father's threats. What could happen if I spoke? And more than that, I remembered the shame. How could I tell what happened in the neighbor's workshop? Who would believe me? "No, ma'am," I replied quietly. "I'm just not sleeping well. I think it's the move, the new city." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push it. She gave me a note for my parents to sign, requesting a visit to the school. I never delivered the note, of course. I tore it into tiny pieces as soon as I left her office. It was around this time that I started thinking about running away, or worse, ending it all. I would spend hours looking out my bedroom window, imagining what it would be like to just walk away without a destination until I was far, far away, or what it would be like to jump from the bridge that crossed the Santa Fe River on the edge of town. These dark fantasies were my only company during sleepless nights. My diary continued to be my refuge. I wrote in it almost every day, hidden under the covers, by the light of a small flashlight a teacher had given me for Christmas. On its yellowed pages, I poured out all my pain, all my hatred, all my hopelessness. Sometimes I would reread what I had written in previous years in Oakhaven, and I realized how the scared little girl from before had turned into a broken teenager, without dreams, without a future. One night, my father came home from work drunker than usual and entered my room. It wasn't session time, and that made me even more terrified. He staggered to my bed, sat on the edge, and started rambling about how he had been humiliated by his supervisor at the mill, how no one respected him in this city, how he missed Oakhaven, where he was somebody. "There, I was Mr. Miller," he muttered, his breath thick with alcohol. "Here, I'm just another worker, just like the others." Suddenly, his eyes changed. They became more focused, colder. He grabbed my arm hard, squeezing until it bruised. "But at home, I'm still the boss," he said through gritted teeth. "Here, I'm in charge, understand?" I nodded quickly, trying to calm him down, but something in me had changed too. The fear was still there, of course, but there was something else now. A dull rage, a hatred that grew with each passing day. At that moment, looking at him so closely, drunk and pathetic, I realized he wasn't the invincible monster I thought he was as a child. He was just a weak, frustrated man who took out his frustrations on a defenseless girl. He left the room as abruptly as he had entered, tripping over his own feet. I heard him fall onto the bed in the next room, and soon he started snoring. My mother arrived shortly after. I heard her light footsteps in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes being washed, and then silence as she went to bed. I lay there, staring at the peeling ceiling, thinking about my life, how I had gotten here, how I could get out. That's when I had an idea. It wasn't really a plan. It was more a thought that slowly took shape. What if I wasn't the only victim? What if there were other girls, other women my father had hurt? And what if I could find these people, put our stories together? The next day, I skipped school. I waited for my parents to leave for work and went to the neighbor's workshop. I needed to see that place in the daylight, without the terror of the sessions. It was a damp room, with exposed brick walls and a concrete floor. In one corner, the old blankets where everything happened. In another, some boxes left by the former residents. I started rummaging through them, not knowing exactly what I was looking for. I found old magazines, rusty tools, some moldy clothes, nothing special. Frustration and despair washed over me. I was about to give up when my hand brushed against a loose floorboard beneath the last box. A flicker of memory, my father, years ago, warning me to never go near that corner of the workshop. Driven by a sudden, defiant impulse, I pried the board open with a rusty screwdriver. Beneath it, nestled in the damp earth, was a metal box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside wasn't just a yellowed envelope, but several. They were filled with photographs and negatives. Photographs of women and girls from Oakhaven, their faces a mask of fear and confusion, in poses that made my stomach churn. In the corner of each photo was a small, neat watermark. Miller Photography. He wasn't just an abuser, he was a collector of suffering. This is the moment the entire story pivots. With this terrible discovery, Charlotte's burden is suddenly multiplied by the silent screams in those photographs, but with that weight comes unexpected power. What does a 15-year-old girl do with evidence that could destroy her entire world? The choice she makes next will define the rest of her life. In that moment, my own fear suddenly felt so small. I realized this was no longer just my story, my dears. Those photographs weren't just proof, they were the silent cries for help from other souls. And somehow, I knew I had to be the one to give them a voice. My stomach churned. So that was it. My father didn't just abuse me. He photographed other women, invaded their privacy. He probably used these photos to blackmail them, to keep them silent. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. It wasn't just about me, about our family secret. It was something bigger, more terrible. I put the photos back in the envelope and hid it under my blouse. I returned home trembling, my heart racing. I needed to think, to decide what to do with this discovery. It was proof, evidence of what my father really was, but how could I use it? Who would believe me? A teenager against an adult man, a respectable worker? That night, I wrote everything in my diary. In detail, every photo I had seen, every name I had recognized. It was like I was assembling a macabre puzzle of my father's secret life. And that's when I made a decision. I couldn't stay silent anymore. It wasn't just about me anymore. There were other victims, other lives destroyed or threatened by him. The next day, I took my diary and the envelope with the photos and went to the police station, not the one in our neighborhood where my father might have connections, but one downtown, far enough away for me to feel safe. I asked to speak with a female officer, if there was one. Luckily, there was. Detective Murphy, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a severe bun and penetrating eyes, sitting in the cold room of the police station, with my diary on my lap and the yellowed envelope of photographs beside me. I felt a mix of terror and determination. Detective Murphy looked at me with those penetrating eyes, waiting for me to start talking. My throat was dry. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the diary. "You can speak, kid," she said, her tone surprisingly gentle for someone with such a stern appearance. "I'm here to listen." I took a deep breath and began to tell my story. At first, the words came out haltingly, interrupted by sobs and long silences. I talked about Oakhaven, about the movie sessions, about my mother with her bowl of popcorn. I told her about the move to Gainesville, about the neighbor's workshop, about the years of terror I had lived through. The detective didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't show any disbelief. She just listened, occasionally jotting something down on a notepad, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished my story, I handed her my diary, open to the most recent pages where I described finding the photographs. "And this," I said, pushing the envelope toward her. "This is what I found yesterday." Detective Murphy opened the envelope carefully, almost as if she feared what she would find inside. She examined the photographs one by one, her face hardening with each image. When she was done, she put them back in the envelope and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. A mixture of compassion, anger, and determination. "Charlotte," she said, using my name for the first time. You were very brave to come here. What your father is doing, is a serious crime. We will take all necessary action. For the first time in 7 years, Charlotte is truly heard and she is believed. But escaping one prison often means entering another, more uncertain one. The system has promised to protect her, but now she is truly alone, and the path to justice is often as treacherous as the one she just left. Let's see how she navigates this terrifying new reality. Those words should have comforted me, but they only increased my terror. What would happen now? Where would I go? What would my father do when he found out I had reported him? I'm scared, I admitted, my voice almost a whisper. He'll kill me when he finds out. He won't lay a finger on you, she assured me, her voice firm as steel. I'm going to assign an officer to stay with you. We're taking you to a temporary shelter where you'll be safe, and we're going to arrest your father today. I left the station accompanied by a young female officer. She took me to a simple house in a residential neighborhood. It was a shelter for women victims of violence, she explained. I would stay there until everything was sorted out. I couldn't leave or contact anyone from the outside for my own safety. The house was run by nuns. Sister Agnes, a woman with a serene face and kind eyes, showed me where I would sleep. A small but clean room, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking an inner garden. There were 3 other women at the shelter, all older than me, all fleeing from violent husbands or partners. No one asked for the details of my story, and I didn't ask about theirs. There was a silent agreement to respect each other's pain. I spent 3 days in that limbo, with no news from the outside world, not knowing what was happening to my parents, not knowing what my fate would be. Sister Agnes tried to distract me, teaching me to knit, talking about books, bringing me food she cooked herself, but my mind couldn't rest. On the morning of the 4th day, Detective Murphy came to visit. Her face was grim, but there was a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. Your father was arrested yesterday, she announced, without ceremony, sitting next to me on the garden bench. We found more photographs at your house, hidden in a false wall he built in the bedroom. And worse, we found negatives from films he made during the abuse. I felt my stomach lurch. Films. He had filmed the sessions. The nausea was so strong I had to bend over, taking deep breaths to keep from vomiting right there. Easy, breathe, Detective Murphy instructed, holding my arm firmly. It's over. He's in custody, and will answer for everything he's done. And my mother? I asked when I managed to compose myself. The detective's expression changed, grew darker. She was also detained, she said after a pause. Charlotte, your mother wasn't just a passive spectator. From the evidence we found, she was an active accomplice. Some of the photographs were taken by her. It was as if the whole world came crashing down on me. It was one thing to know my mother watched, that she didn't protect me. It was something else entirely to discover she participated actively, that she helped my father in that horror. No, I murmured, shaking my head in denial. It can't be. She was a victim, too. She was afraid of him. I understand this is hard to accept, Detective Murphy said, her voice softer now. But the evidence is clear. We found a notebook of hers, a kind of diary, where she described. Well, I don't need to go into details. She wasn't being forced, Charlotte. She chose to participate. There are wounds that cut deeper than any physical act, and this revelation is the final, most devastating blow. How does a person recover when the very foundation of their world, their own mother, is revealed to be part of the nightmare? Her journey from here isn't just about survival. It's about rebuilding a soul from complete ashes. I began to cry, a different cry from any I had cried before. It wasn't of fear nor of physical pain. It was the cry of the last illusion being shattered, of the last hope fading away. Even in the worst moments, I had always believed that my mother, in some way, was also a victim, perhaps traumatized, perhaps too terrified to react. To know that she was an active part of that horror was more than I could bear. Detective Murphy gave me time to process that devastating revelation. When I finally calmed down, she continued, "We need to talk about what happens now. You're 15, almost 16. Legally, you're still a minor. We have a few options for you. She explained that I could go to a juvenile shelter until I turned 18, but acknowledged that wouldn't be ideal, as my birthday was only a few months away. Another option was a foster family who would take me in temporarily, or, if I preferred, I could stay at the nuns' shelter for a while longer while we decided on the best path. There's a fourth possibility, she added hesitantly. We have a witness protection program. Since your testimony will be crucial in the case against your parents, we can offer that. It would mean a complete change. New city, new identity, a new start. That last option lit something inside me. A new start, far from Gainesville, far from the memories, far from everything that reminded me of the hell I had lived. I want that, I said without hesitation. I want to go far away, to start over somewhere no one knows me, where no one knows. Detective Murphy nodded in understanding. I get it. I'll start the procedures, but first, you'll need to testify, give an official statement that will be used in the trial. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't, of course. How could anyone be prepared to publicly relive the worst nightmare of their life? But I knew it was necessary, not just for my own freedom, but to ensure my parents could never harm anyone again. Yes, I answered, a new determination growing inside me. I'll tell everything, every detail. They need to pay for what they did. That night, alone in the small shelter room, I wrote a final entry in my diary, a new diary that Sister Agnes had given me, since the old one was with the police as evidence. I wrote about the pain of the final betrayal, about the discovery that my mother was not a victim but a willing participant in the abuse. I wrote about the fear of what was to come, but also about a faint hope that was beginning to dawn, the hope of a different future, of a life far from that horror. When I finished writing, I did something I had never done before. I tore out the page, crumpled it up, and threw it out the window, watching the wind carry it away. It was a symbolic gesture, my first attempt to leave the past behind. The past that now, for the first time, was starting to truly feel like the past. 2 weeks had passed since I was taken to the nuns' shelter. 2 weeks of anxious waiting, sleepless nights, and days filled with small tasks Sister Agnes gave me to keep my mind busy. I knitted 2 scarves, learned to make homemade bread, helped organize the shelter's small library, anything to keep from thinking too much about what was to come. Detective Murphy visited me regularly, updating me on the case's progress. My parents remained in custody. My father denied everything, claiming I had invented the story to get revenge on him for being a strict parent. My mother, surprisingly, confessed. She told the investigators everything, confirming every detail of my account and revealing other horrors I hadn't even known about. She's cooperating with the investigation, the detective explained. It doesn't lessen the gravity of what she did, but it helps the process. I couldn't understand why my mother would confess now, after so many years of complicit silence. Was it remorse, or just a strategy to get a plea deal? She asked about you, Detective Murphy mentioned, watching my reaction closely. Wants to know if you're okay. A bitter laugh rose in my throat. Okay? How could I be okay? How dare she worry about me now, after everything? Tell her I'm dead, I replied, my voice laden with a rage I didn't know I carried. To her, to him, I'm dead, and they are to me. The detective just nodded, respecting my feelings. She didn't bring it up again. At the end of that week, I had an unexpected visitor. A tall man with glasses, wearing a simple suit. He introduced himself as Mr. Wallace, the district attorney in charge of the case. Charlotte, he said, sitting across from me in the shelter's visiting room. We need to talk about your deposition. It will be crucial for the trial. He explained the procedure in detail. I wouldn't have to confront my parents directly. I would speak only to the judge in a separate room. My testimony would be recorded and used in the trial. It needed to be detailed, specific, but he assured me he would do everything to make the process as least traumatic as possible. When? I asked, feeling my stomach sink. Tomorrow, he replied, adjusting his glasses. The sooner we get this step over with, the faster we can move forward with the protection program. That night was the worst since I had arrived at the shelter. I didn't sleep a wink. I relived every moment of horror, every session, every empty stare from my mother eating popcorn while my life was being destroyed. When the sun rose, I was already ready, dressed in the simple, clean clothes the nuns had given me. Sister Agnes accompanied me to the courthouse. It was an intimidating building, with imposing columns and a staircase that seemed endless. Inside, cold, dark corridors led to rooms with heavy wooden doors. I was led to a small room where Detective Murphy and Mr. Wallace were already waiting with an older man who was introduced as Judge Peterson. The deposition lasted for hours. I spoke until my voice was hoarse, until there were no more tears to cry. I told everything, from the first movie sessions in Oakhaven to the abuse in the neighbor's workshop in Gainesville. I spoke about my mother's role, about the diary where I recorded everything, about the photographs I found. The judge asked occasional questions, always respectful, but insisting on details I would have preferred to forget. When I finally finished, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. But there was also a strange sense of relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, someone with the power to do something had listened to me, had believed me. "You were very brave," Judge Peterson said, a respectful gravity in his voice. "Your testimony is crucial for justice to be served." I returned to the shelter, accompanied by Sister Agnes, who held my hand the entire way without saying a word. Sometimes silence is the best comfort. In the days that followed, I was in a daze, as if I had exhausted every possible emotion. I slept a lot, ate little, and spoke even less. The other women at the shelter, sensing my state, were kind in their own way. One would bring me a cup of tea. Another would leave flowers picked from the garden by my bed. Small gestures of solidarity that meant the world to me at that moment. A week after my deposition, Detective Murphy returned to the shelter. Her face was different. There was a lightness I hadn't seen before. "The judge has ordered your parents to be held without bail," she announced. "The case will go to trial, but that could take months. In the meantime, they will both remain in custody." It was a victory, albeit a small one. It meant that, at least for now, they couldn't reach me, couldn't harm anyone else. "And the protection program?" I asked, anxious to know when I could truly start my new life. "That's what I came to talk about," she said, sitting beside me. "We found a place for you in Tampa. It's a big city, where it will be easier to rebuild your life anonymously. You'll have a new identity, a place to live, and help to finish your studies and find work." Tampa, the city of my dreams. The place I mentally transported myself to during the worst moments. It was almost too surreal to believe. "When?" I asked, barely containing the hope in my voice. "In 3 days," she replied. "There are some documents to prepare, some instructions I need to give you, and you'll need to choose your new name." My new name? I hadn't thought about that. Who did I want to be in this new life? Who could I be, free from the horrors of the past? "Can I keep Charlotte?" I asked hesitantly. It was the only piece of me that wasn't stained by my parents' dirty hands. It was the name my maternal grandmother had chosen long before all the horror began. Detective Murphy considered for a moment. "The last name has to change, obviously, but I think we can keep Charlotte as a first name. It's not so uncommon as to make you easily identifiable." In the 3 days that followed, I prepared for my new life. I received new documents, a birth certificate, a social security card, all with my new name, Charlotte Antunes. The last name was common enough not to draw attention, but different enough from the original to ensure my anonymity. I also received detailed instructions about my arrival in Tampa. A social worker would be waiting for me at the bus station. Mrs. Gable, a woman who had worked with the protection program for years. She would take me to a small apartment in the Seminole Heights neighborhood, where I would stay initially. I would receive a small financial stipend for 6 months, enough time to get settled, find work, and start over. On the eve of my departure, Sister Agnes called me to her office. It was a simple cubicle with a wooden desk, a few chairs, and shelves full of religious books. "I have something for you," she said, holding out a small package. "A little something to remember us by." Inside the simple wrapping paper was a wooden rosary with dark, polished beads and a small prayer book. I know your faith has been shaken, and with good reason, she continued, her voice soft. But when you're ready, maybe this can bring you some comfort. I hugged her, tears streaming silently. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude. In the midst of so much horror, I had found people like Sister Agnes, Detective Murphy, people who believed in me, who helped me survive. On the morning of my departure, I said goodbye to the other women at the shelter. Some cried, others just squeezed my hands in silence. They all understood, in their own way, what it meant to start over. Detective Murphy came to pick me up personally. On the way to the bus station, we passed the police station. Want to go in? See your diary one last time before you go? She asked. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. Number. That diary belongs to the old Charlotte, the one who suffered, the one who survived. I'm only taking with me the Charlotte who is going to live, not just survive. She smiled, a smile of understanding and respect. You have a strength inside you that few people have, you know that? You're going to do well in Tampa, I'm sure of it. The bus to Tampa left promptly at 10 a.m. Sitting by the window, I watched Gainesville fade away, the buildings, the streets, the memories. I didn't look back once. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, on the future that for the first time seemed possible. On my lap, a new diary, a parting gift from Detective Murphy. On the first page, I wrote only, "Today, my life begins. My real life." With those 7 words, the curtain finally falls on the theater of horror. But who is the new Charlotte? The one who will step off that bus in Tampa with a new name and an uncertain future. Stay with us as we follow her on the most difficult and most hopeful part of her journey, learning not just to survive, but to live. Like a baby sea turtle finding its way to the ocean for the first time, I was terrified and yet so full of hope. I didn't know what lay ahead. I only knew that I had to swim, to just keep moving forward. Leaving that terrible shore behind was my only chance at life, and I held on to it with everything I had. I arrived in Tampa on a rainy autumn day, with just one small suitcase containing a few clothes and my new diary. The city greeted me with its gray sky and cool air, so different from the heat of Oak Haven or the dust of Gainesville. Mrs. Gable was waiting for me at the bus station, just as planned. A woman with gray hair in a bun, wearing a navy blue coat and carrying a floral umbrella. "Welcome to your new life, my dear," she said as she hugged me, as if she had known me for years. Those first few months in Tampa were difficult. I won't lie. I lived in a small apartment in Seminole Heights, a neighborhood in the northern part of the city. It was a simple place, 1 room, a tiny living area, a kitchen, and a bathroom. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was just mine, where I could lock the door and feel safe. I started taking night classes to finish high school while working during the day at a small fabric store downtown. The pay wasn't much, but combined with the help I received from the protection program, it was enough to get by. Slowly, I adapted to the rhythm of the big city, learning to use the buses, discovering the parks, getting used to the humidity that seemed more intense than any I had ever felt. It was at the fabric store that I met Walter. He was a prominent I&A, sales representative for a textile company from North Carolina. He came to Tampa every 2 months to show the new collections. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, but with a quiet and respectful manner that put me at ease. We would talk about literature, about politics. Those were turbulent times in the country with the Vietnam War protests, and about his dream of one day opening his own store. At first, I avoided him. I avoided all men, really. The fear was too great, the scars still too fresh. But Walter was patient. He didn't pressure me, didn't insist. He was just there, with his calm smile and interesting stories, always respecting my silences, my retreats. It took almost a year before I agreed to go out for coffee with him. Another 6 months until our first kiss, on a Sunday afternoon on the Bayshore Boulevard, the city's famous waterfront walkway. With him, I learned that not all men were like my father, that there could be affection without violence, intimacy without abuse, love without fear. We married in 1975, in a simple ceremony at the Sacred Heart Catholic Church. I was 22 years old, and for the first time, I felt that life could be good. We bought a small house in the same Seminole Heights neighborhood, near where I already lived. Walter managed to open his fabric store, and I started working with him. We were happy, in our own quiet way. The only dream we never realized was having children. The doctors could never explain exactly why, but they suspected that the physical traumas I suffered in my adolescence had left lasting effects. I mourned that loss, of course, but Walter always said, "We are a complete family, you and I. The rest is a gift if it comes." And so we lived, year after year, building our small, everyday happiness. The store prospered. We moved to a bigger house. We took a few trips. I saw the ocean for the first time at 30. At Clearwater Beach, life went on, calm as a river that has finally found its way after navigating many rocks. In 2010, Walter got sick. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that by the time you discover it, it's already too advanced. In 6 months, he was gone. It was a different kind of pain from any I had ever felt. Not the sharp terror of my childhood abuse, but a deep sadness, an immense emptiness from losing my partner of almost 35 years. I was lost for a while. I sold the store. I had no energy to continue on my own. I spent my days at home, staring at the walls, at the photos that showed our life together. It was my goddaughter, Megan, the daughter of my best friend Patricia, whom I had run into by chance years after arriving in Tampa, who pulled me out of that stupor. "Aunt Charlotte," she said one day, "you need to do something with your hands. The heart calms when the hands are busy." She was the one who signed me up for a ceramics class at the neighborhood community center. I went reluctantly, more to please her than out of any real interest. But in the very first class, when I felt the cool, malleable clay between my fingers, something awakened in me, a creativity I didn't know I had, a form of expression I had never experienced. I started by making simple pieces, little pots, small vases. Then, one day, inspired by a magazine about American folk art, I tried to make a miniature ceramic sea turtle. It wasn't perfect, of course, but there was something about it in the painted patterns on the dark body, the peculiar shape of its head that charmed me. I made another, and then another, each one a little different, each with its own personality. People started to notice, to ask if they were for sale. Almost without realizing it, I started a small business that grew more than I could have ever imagined. Today, at 72, my ceramic sea turtles are known throughout Tampa. I sell them at craft fairs, have a small web page that my grandniece helps me manage, and I even receive orders from other cities. It's a job that brings me joy, that keeps my hands busy and calms my heart, just as Megan said it would. I live in a quiet apartment back in Seminole Heights, the same neighborhood where Walter and I built our life together. It's my little corner of peace in this world. I have my ceramics workshop in the back room, my collection of favorite turtles on the living room shelf, my books, and my good memories. Patricia comes to visit me every week. We have tea together, talk about the old times and the new. I never went back to Oak Haven or Gainesville. I never heard from my parents again. I learned from Detective Murphy that both were sentenced to many years in prison. If they are still alive, I don't know, and I don't want to know. That part of my story is closed, stored in a place in my memory that I visit less and less. Tampa welcomed me, gave me a new life, allowed me to be who I really am. Not the victim, not the survivor, but simply Charlotte, the artisan of the sea turtles, Walter's widow, Patricia's friend, and the great aunt to Megan's wonderful children. A woman who learned that life, even after the worst of terrors, can flourish again. My story, in the end, is not about what they did to me, but about what I chose to build from the rubble. Each sea turtle I craft feels like a piece of that journey. They are creatures of resilience. They carry their homes, their history, on their backs, yet they still move forward, navigating the vast, unpredictable ocean. My scars are my shell. They are a part of me, but they do not define the direction I swim. Time doesn't erase the wounds, my dears, but it can transform them into strength. If you are in the dark right now, please hear me. Your story does not end there. Silence is the abuser's ocean, where they hide their crimes in the deep. Your voice is the lighthouse, Find one small reason to turn on that light, a secret diary, a teacher's kind word, a hope for a distant city, and hold on to it. The sun will rise, my dears, and its warmth on the water is worth swimming towards. You deserve to be here to feel it. Thank you for letting this old turtle share her heart with you. This is just one of many stories on our long journey. If these words have touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel to journey together, to listen, and to share, so that you know in this ocean, you are never alone.